Just when I thought everything was over, my consciousness was suddenly pulled back to reality, finding myself drenched in sweat with a racing heart. Chapter 24. An indeterminate amount of time later, the heavy blackness I was swimming in seemed to draw back, letting me claw my way towards the light. I was still surrounded by searing heat, but it was at a more tolerable level, struggling in the confines of darkness. I was afraid of what would happen if I cowled and get away. In the back of my mind, I felt my wolf stirring. As I finally escaped the deep recesses of unconsciousness, my eyes snapped open and I sucked in a breath of air as I adjusted to the dim lighting. My skin was sticky with sweat. I was practically swimming in it. Heart pounding. I glanced around nervously. I was in my room and it was dark outside. I could see a glimmer of moonlight trickling in through my partially closed blinds. My sweltering body was wrapped in blankets and I weakly struggled, attempted to pry my sweaty skin from the fabric. Slowly, the recent events were coming back to me: the purge, Gabriel's moonlit, bathed face, the blood sharing, and then the darkness. I yanked my hand out from under the comforter and glanced at it. There was a thin line across the center of my palm where I had slashed myself. It was already mostly healed, but I wondered if it would ever completely fade. That scar signified that Gabriel was my alpha now. Tensing, I realized that deep in the back of my consciousness, I could almost sense his presence. It was as if he was hovering just out of reach. It was a sensation similar to when Brett was alpha. The thought made me nervous. Gabriel could talk to me whenever he wanted. My heart began quickening its pace and my wolf paced with excitement as I thought about hearing his husky voice inside my head. Adjusting my position, my eyes roamed the room again. How long had I been out? It was still dark, so perhaps it had only been a few hours. I felt marginally better than before. There was still a lingering itch under my skin, but it was bearable and not nearly as excruciating. There was a loud creak outside my room and the door opened, revealing my disheveled father. His eyes flashed with relief when he saw me and he hurried over. He breathed, putting a cool head on my hot and sticky forehead. How long have I been asleep? My voice rasping against my parched throat, and enthusiasm, an entire day. I blinked with surprise as my father grabbed a nearby glass of water and brought it to my lips. Gratefully, I swallowed the cool liquid as he tipped it down my throat, draining the cup completely dry. I studied his face closely. His brows were furrowed with worry and judging by his resigned expression. My father knew exactly what was wrong with me and was hesitant to say it aloud. Dad. Trying to sit up, but he reached out a hand and pressed me back into the pillow. Skylar, you need to rest. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. What happened? I intertwined my fingers under the blankets where he couldn't see them, trying to mask my nervousness. Sighing, my father pulled up a nearby chair and settled down. He rested his elbows on my bed and gazed at me intently. There's no need to beat around the bush here, Skylar, so I'm just going to come out and say it. I nodded, mouth suddenly dry again. You're getting your affinity. I nearly choked on my own spit. What? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelby. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. But I'm almost 20 years old. How I spluttered in confusion. He reached out a hand and rested it on my shoulder, rubbing it to soothe me. I know. It's rare that something like this happens, but when I was trying to heal you, I could sense the affinity in you. That's why you still have a fever. I can lessen the pain for you, but I can't completely make you well. This is something your body has to do for itself. Silently staring, I sat for a long moment before I spoke, voice coming out as a cracked whisper. How did this happen? My father sighed yet again. As you know, the affinity is usually hereditary. What you weren't aware of is the fact that there are two forms of the affinity, the dominant and the recessive. Most children of pack doctors, about 90%, inherit the dominant form. A child that receives the dominant gene will get their affinity before or during puberty. They get it at this time because the body is still malleable, still adjusting to the wolf inside. Matured wolves do not so readily accept change like that. Contemplating. The recessive gene works differently. I nodded once more, chewing on my bottom lip as I absorbed the information. So I have the recessive form. A child with a recessive affinity will only inherit the ability to use it if their parent dies while the child is still young. If the parent is still alive, as the child ages and matures with a recessive affinity, they grow increasingly less likely to ever show signs of being able to use it. Basically, the recessive gene gets buried so deeply it can never be drawn out. So how am I getting it? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. In way past puberty, and you're still alive. That's why it's unusual. When Cain put me in a coma, it triggered something in you. It would have been normal if you were younger, but since you've fully matured and the gene is so deeply buried, your body shouldn't still have been able to make the transition. So why am I transitioning? His eyes were distant as he pondered. There are always exceptions to every rule. The only thing I can think of is that some part of you still recognized the deeply buried gene. Your body is already going through changes because of the mating pull. It might have made you susceptible to other changes, such as your affinity emerging. His expression grew solemn as he added in a quiet voice. Or it could have something to do with whatever concoction Cain injected me with. I felt a flutter of anger at the vampire's name, and our conversation in the woods came rushing back to me. His words made sense now. Cain had suspected that something was happening within me, and it was almost like he wanted it to happen. That freaked me out more than anything. He had planned on taking me with him. What exactly did he want with my father's blood? And what did he want with me now that I might have an affinity? I tried to change the subject. I had time to recall that out. I had to focus on the immediate problem. I shifted position again, wincing slightly. I felt incredibly sore. Is it always this painful? He shook his head. No. It comes with a mild fever, but nothing like you've been experiencing. It goes back to the maturity thing. Your wolf isn't accepting the transition as well as she would have when you were young. Outside of the mating pool, your body has never anticipated change like this. Honestly, being so close to Gabriel is making things worse. Your wolf is struggling to cope with the mating pull at the same time as the affinity. Sharing blood with him just compounded everything. Your body went into sensory overload. I blinked up at him, feeling a pang of worry. Did this mean I howled and see Gabriel until I felt better? My father seemed to read my mind. You'll still be around him. Just limit physical contact until you're better. Something flashed in his eyes, but I cowed and place it. Not like anyone could keep him away. He almost bit all of our heads off when we were trying to help you. For a while he didn't want anyone else touching you. My face instantly heated up even more, and I felt my cheeks turning red with a blush. My wolf was feeling very satisfied with her mate's protectiveness. Releasing a heavy breath, I pushed some of my dark locks away from my sticky face. It was all making sense, and a large part of me was excited that this was finally happening. I had always been teased for not inheriting the affinity. Now I had the chance of being a pack doctor, of being special. I bet our mate will be proud, my wolf said smugly. So when this all ends, they'll be able to use it. Just like that. Like I said, I've never dealt with this before. Hopefully your fever goes away within the next day or two. Normally it only lasts a day, but I have a feeling yours will be more drawn out. After you feel better, I can't try to teach you how to use it. I thought I detected a bit of pride in his expression. For a split second. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I could have sworn I saw a flash of worry in his green eyes as well. I've been feeling feverish for a couple of days now. I was just ignoring it. I was going to bring it up, but I wanted to wait until you felt better. His eyes narrowed. You should have told me sooner. You almost gave everyone a heart attack. The typical stern expression was back on my father's face, but there was still a tinge of worry there. What's wrong? My father shook his head. I just don't like the fact that you're so sick and I can only do a little to help. You're strong. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Your body will get through the transition fine. He spoke reassuringly, but his voice was tense. I really hoped he was right. The fact that he was slightly nervous. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Was off-putting. I would make it through the transition I had to. My body may not be used to this sort of thing, but to get over it, I had to be strong. Especially in a time like this. I was alone in my room for the next couple hours. Because my father went to go rest. Using his affinity had worn him out after recent events. He had also informed me that Deva had helped take care of me during the day I was passed out. The thought made me extremely uneasy, and I was sure how to feel about it. I knew she couldn't stand me, yet she had still helped me out twice now. The redhead was currently staying in our house in the guest bedroom. I hadn't seen her since I had woken up, but I could catch her scent. It was strange that she was here without anyone in her pack. Just then, a startling realization came to me. Was she avoiding Will? It seemed a bit far-fetched, but she had disappeared the night of the purge, and now she seemed to be lying low at my home for the most part. She had no chance of seeing Will since Gabriel had scared him away. I wondered why on earth she would possibly be avoiding him. Will would be overjoyed to find his mate, so I could not fathom how she wouldn't feel the same way. It was a puzzling mystery I was determined to work out. I had yet to see Gabriel since I woke up, and I couldn't help the hurt that blossomed when I thought about it. Did he not even care that I'd fainted in the middle of the ceremony? My father said he brought me home, but now he was making no effort to come check up on me. I would never admit it to him, but it's tongue. Especially after our moment yesterday. Maybe he was regretting it. That thought was very disheartening. A couple hours after my father told me about my affinity and subsequently made me some potato soup. My favorite high let my eyelids droop. It was still uncomfortably hot in my room, but I was supposed to stay under the covers to sweat it out. Since my father would not let me get up except to go to the back room, I might as well sleep. My mind began to wander and my thoughts aimlessly drifted, until I found myself dozing. Minutes later, I was dreaming. It was one of those dreams where I knew it was real. I knew I could wake up at any moment, but that didn't make it any less frightening. Cain was in my dream, or at least I think it was him. He materialized as a shadowy presence at the edges of my vision, relentlessly chasing me as I raced in wolf form through the woods. My paws thundered against the ground, but every second that passed, I knew he was gaining on me. My heart was pounding, and I was desperately trying to leave the woods before Cain captured me. I had to save Maria and Will. They would pay the price if I didn't make it in time. Seconds later, I felt claws sink into my back, and I was brought hard to the ground. The monster leaned over me, baring his fangs in a hiss, kicking and thrashing. I snarled and growled while fighting wholeheartedly to get the bloodsucker off of me. But Cain held me down, pressing my shoulders into the ground harder, preventing me from struggling. I whined in misery, kicking back and forth, and Cain opened his hissing mouth to taunt me. "Skylar, wake up," he hissed menacingly. "What? You're e-dreaming? Wake up." I continued to thrash. "Skylar." Cain began to shake me, and I was roughly yanked from the violent dream, sent crashing into reality. My eyes snapped open and I panted. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Taking in the contents of my room as relief struck me. I had known it was grateful I could escape the terror of Cain's pursuit. It was then that I became aware that it was Gabriel above me, pinning me down. Not Cain. He was standing next to my bed, but his hands were planted firmly on my shoulders as he pressed me into the mattress. It was still nighttime outside and my light was off. Bars of moonlight squeezed through the blinds and fell upon my mate's face as he stared down at me, making sure I was truly awake now. My mouth opened slightly as I became aware of our proximity. His face was only a foot or two above mine. I stared at him unabashedly, appreciating the way the light from outside accentuated his chiseled features. He was so beautiful. His dark eyes had an incredible amount of depth, and I had never realized just how thick and dark his eyelashes were. My eyes trailed along his high cheekbones before falling to his mouth. He had a light growth of stubble along his jawline, But it suited him. I was sure I was blushing now, but I couldn't tear myself away from his ethereal perfection. Gabriel released me suddenly and backed away, and I felt cold despite my fever and all of the blankets. "You were dreaming," he muttered by way of explanation. I tried to sit up a bit. "It was Cain," I replied, glad that my voice didn't shake. My wolf was purring in the back of my mind, and it was quite distracting. Gabriel's expression tightened. I glanced around, noticing the chair pulled up by my bed. Had he been watching me sleep? The thought made my blush return in full force and I avoided his eyes. "Do you have nightmares often?" I pulled my hands out from under the covers, examining them as I replied. "No, this was the first in a long time." Slowly, Gabriel moved back to the chair and lowered himself. I felt a prickle of excitement. He was finally staying to keep me company. I tried to remember what my father said about physical contact. Gabriel had held my shoulders down while I was waking up, but it didn't seem to have made my fever worse. Thankfully, I supposed it was the blood sharing that had set everything off. I would have to be careful, even though I was itching to reach out and run my fingers along the side of his face. "Where were you all day?" Hoping I didn't sound too pathetic. "Working on pack logistics," was his simple reply. I nodded, picking at the blanket. "Are you feeling better?" I glanced up at him, the question taking me completely by surprise. He was giving me a cursory scan as if assuring himself that I was well. I felt a trickle of warmth. "I am now that you're here," I replied before I could think about it, unable to help myself. I looked away from him again as I felt my face heat up. Since when was I so straightforward with him? I heard Gabriel's sharp intake of breath and he was silent. Had I gone too far? "Your father said that your contact with me worsened things," Gabriel replied after a moment of tense silence. "The blood sharing overwhelmed my body. I didn't know your body would react like that, or I know." I cut him off before he could go any further. There was no need for him to explain himself to me. I didn't require an explanation. Closing my eyes for a moment, I remembered the minutes just before I'd fainted. The desire that had coursed through my body was easy to recall. In those seconds, I had wanted Gabriel more than ever before. My wolf had been dangerously close to forcing me to jump him. I peeked up at my mate from the corner of my eye. He was staring into space, jaw clenched. I aimlessly wondered what he was thinking about. Gabriel was always so closed, often hard to read. He put up barriers between himself and everybody else, although occasionally I thought I saw through his walls. Those moments of true emotion glimmering in his dark eyes made everything worth it. I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable as we sat there, the silence stretching on, the heat rushing around under my skin reminding me that my fever had yet to break. I felt my forehead beading with sweat, some of it trickling down my temples. I needed some sort of distraction before I focused more on discomfort. Glancing at Gabriel again, I felt a prick of curiosity. I'd always wanted to know more about him, but Hed rarely volunteered information about himself. Well, here he was sitting next to me and I had absolutely nothing to do but talk with him. I was sure why I was feeling so brave. Maybe it was my body sickness, or Gabriel's proximity, or the fact that I'd up with him pushing everyone away. I knew I needed to make a decision soon. My wolf was constantly reminding me of that, and the issue was always hovering in the back of my mind. I kept finding reasons to put it off, but the more I ignored it, the more attached to Gabriel I was becoming. Soon my logical side would have no say in the matter. I would be deciding purely based off of instinct. I wouldn't lie to myself. Some part of me just wanted to follow my instincts despite any potential consequences. Either way, I wanted to know more about the person that was constantly plaguing my thoughts. All of my reasoning combined into a sense of determination, and I shifted my body to face Gabriel. Gabriel, his dark eyes flickered to me, some sort of undefined emotion lingering there. He waited for continue. I just realized something. I had to look away again, unable to bear the intensity of his eyes. "You told me everything about your heritage and your parents, but you told me next to nothing about you." His brow had furrowed slightly as if he had no clue why I was bringing this up. "I know hardly anything about you. I don't know your favorite color, or favorite type of music, or what hobbies you have, or what movies you watch, or what you spent your spare time doing before all of that hell for training. I trailed off, realizing I was rambling. I tried not to squirm where I was sitting. An expression of incredulity had made its way on Gabriel's face. I knew my examples were stupid and shallow, but surely he got the point. Usually mates got to know each other after they met. We had never had that opportunity. Why does it matter? He asked after a long moment, voice tense. I could tell he really didn't like talking about himself. He wasn't used to it. Because I mentally cursed myself for my nervousness. Why was I freaking out? He was my mate. It should not be so difficult. Because I want to know you. He remained silent, as if he was having an internal argument. You're my mate. The only mate I'll ever have. You're supposed to get to know your mate. Right. I cleared my throat, knowing the pink tinge was returning to my cheeks. Why did I think this was a good idea? I should have known that the thought of opening up would freak Gabriel out. He was looking away from me. Jaw clenched. I mean, if you're destined to spend the rest of your life with someone, shouldn't you know them first? It's what normal people do. I know our situation is anything but normal again. I trailed off. Do you honestly not want to know anything about me? The hurt was palpable in my voice, but I didn't try to hide it. Gabriel still seemed so closed off and disinterested. If I cowed and crack his walls, nobody would ever stand a chance. Or maybe he didn't care about me as much as I thought. Judging by the way he was still sitting stiff and silent, I was annoying him. Never mind, I said finally, my voice very small. I turned my head away, unable to look at him. My wolf was whining softly. As hurt as I was by his lack of response, I had to remind myself that we weren't a couple of pubescent teenagers trying to get to know each other on a first date. What we had was much deeper and more instinctive. Still, I wished he would show a little more emotion. I shouldn't have tried that. I should have known it was stupid. Several seconds trickled by. I knew my face was still vibrant red. At this point, I almost wished Gabriel would just leave me in here, so I could wallow in my embarrassment. I would find something other than 20 questions to occupy my time while I was feeling so shoddy. I was completely shocked when I finally heard his deep baritone. Blue. My head snapped around and I blinked at him. What? My favorite color is blue. His voice was softer now, eyes boring into mine. I stared at him in shock, feeling my stomach churn with excitement. What type of music do you like? I asked after a minute, hoping he would continue to answer. Classical music is some of the only music I can tolerate. Oh, so my choice in the car had been a good one. Hobbies. Eyes growing somewhat distant. I don't have time for anything outside alpha duties. What about when you were younger? I was worried I was pushing it. Gabriel's childhood was a sore subject. Sure enough, his expression tightened, but he surprised me by answering. My mother used to play piano. After she left, my father forced one of the pack members to teach me. I was sure I was gaping. You play piano? As cliché as it sounded, I found that extremely attractive. For a moment, it was like I was in high school again, learning how to talk to boys. It was strange feeling like that in my current situation. I used to. After a while, it made things worse because it reminded my father of her. I didn't have to ask who her was. I haven't had time in years. I was practically squirming with joy. I couldn't believe he was opening up to me. What's your FAV? Gabriel cut me off this time. It's your turn to answer questions. The way Gabriel was staring at me indicated genuine interest. I snapped my mouth shut, feeling my heartbeats increase in frequency. Okay, what do you want to know? Anything. I glanced at him quizzically. Just tell me about yourself. He elaborated. I racked my brains, coming up with absolutely nothing interesting. Gabriel would probably be bored with whatever I had to tell him, but I continued anyways. My favorite color changes every day of the week. I am addicted to crime shows. I have the entire series of Entanglements is in here on DVD. I tried to learn how to play guitar once and failed miserably. I'll listen to pretty much any music except country. I've seen every Disney movie at least 10 times. Oh, and I can't stand sauerkraut. I wrinkled my nose in disgust at the thought. I couldn't meet Gabriel's eyes. I knew I was a boring person, and that he thought our whole exchange was trivial. But truthfully it meant a lot to me that we were having a normal conversation in our anything but normal situation. When I finally glanced back at him, he seemed to have absorbed all of my words and was mulling them over thoughtfully. I was touched that he had listened. Your turn again. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Perhaps sounded a bit too excited, and his expression instantly morphed into the customary guarded one. Favorite TV show? I almost winced again as I asked. I was awful at coming up with questions, but I didn't want to ask anything too serious and make Gabriel uncomfortable. I don't have time to watch Stevie. I was surprised. Well, what about before you were alpha? Or when you were little? I couldn't picture my hulking, muscular mate as little, although it seemed the one picture of him as a child. Gabriel frowned. I don't know. I guess I watched Scooby do a lot as a child. I grinned widely at him, remembering my own fondness for the show. I was trying not to laugh at the image of a tiny, black-haired Gabriel sitting in front of a TV and watching Scooby and the gang. I supposed all of that must have been before Rebecca left and everything fell apart. Gabriel was staring at me, taken aback, and I quickly masked my expression with my hand. I didn't want him to think I was laughing at him. Where did you live when you were younger? Before you came here? I decided to risk another question. The Appalachians. He made no effort to elaborate on that. Your turn. Okay, I said tentatively, not liking the serious tone his voice had taken. What was he going to ask? Gabriel looked down then, running one hand through his hair. He avoided my gaze as he spoke, his voice thick with tension. Was there anything between you and your friend? It took me a moment to realize who he was speaking about and my eyes shot open with surprise. Oh, you mean Will? Gabriel didn't respond to my question. He was sitting there, tense, and I could tell he really didn't like thinking about it. No. I mean, I thought I liked him at the beginning of high school. We kissed once and I didn't feel anything. He has always been a friend to me since then. Nothing else. I decided to be truthful, although I felt a pain at the way Gabriel's fist clenched when I said kissed. He looks at you as more than a friend, he said coolly, still avoiding my gaze. I know, but he'll never feel anything other than friendship for him. How can I? The last part came out as nearly a whisper and Gabriel's head shot up as his eyes connected with mine. They were burning with some medley of emotions and I had the urge to reach out and touch him, although I forcibly kept my hands to myself. My wolf growled at my resistance toward our instincts. Gabriel's eyes suddenly glazed over, and I realized he was mentally conversing with someone. I felt a jolt as I pondered the fact that I could contact him whenever I wanted. I too, or any of the Black Mountains pack when I was in wolf form. We were all connected through the alpha now. Gabriel stood up from the chair, bringing himself to his full height. I have to go check on some logistics for Eli, and I left the papers at Jack's, he said brusquely. I was surprised he was giving me an explanation at all. His eyes from the intensity was gone and I instantly wanted it back. I was hoping to continue the questioning and find out more about him, but apparently luck was not on my side right now. Gabriel observed me for a moment. Take care, he finally said, his voice softer than expected. I felt a flush creep up my neck and I watched as he exited the room and trudged down the stairs. Seconds later, the front door slammed. About 2 hours later, the TV downstairs turned on, and I was brought out of my dozing state. My throat was raw and parched again. I stretched, deciding that it hadn't hurt to go grab a glass of water after I went to the restroom. I slowly climbed out of bed, ignoring the protesting aches and pains. The room's air was cooler when I washed under the stifling covers and it felt nice on my sweaty skin. After I used the restroom, I tiptoed downstairs, curious about who was watching television. My parents had already come to check on me after Gabriel left and they were now fast asleep in their room. I hadn't heard Gabriel's male pack members roaming around, so but limited the possibilities. My eyes fell on a familiar head of red hair and I'd not to wint. She had helped me after all. The least I could do was thank her despite my dislike for her. Ava had some mindless drama playing on the TV, and was curled up on the couch with some blankets, her blue eyes fixated on the screen. She ignored me as I made myself a glass of water, pressing the cool glass against my burning forehead. I took a deep breath, really not wanting to talk to her, but my parents had always taught me manners. I slowly made my way over to the armchair next to the couch she was sitting on. Still, Ava did not bother to glance at me as I made myself comfortable and focused on the tea. There were a few moments of awkward silence before I gathered the courage to speak on. I never said thanks. Her eyes flickered to me and back to the tea. She said nothing, so. Thank you for helping me and my father. Ava nodded brusquely. I felt a prick of irritation. Could she really not say anything in return? Are you ever going to tell me why you dislike me so much? I blurted out after another moment. Might as well try to clear the air while she was staying in my house. Ava turned to face me then. Eyes narrowed slightly. I sure had her attention now. To my audiobook extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbe. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. I know you don't like me. It's pretty obvious. I think I deserve to at least know why. She pursed her lips and observed me thoughtfully. For an instant, I wished Ava could be more like one of the stupid bimbos from high school. She seemed very cunning and it made me nervous. Is it just because I'm an outsider? I continued impatiently. I don't like your peck. If that's what you mean. She finally spoke dismissively. Like it or not? We're all together now. I don't like it. She turned back to the tea. I almost growled. Look, we need to cooperate here. So just tell me why. I don't need to tell you anything. They'll just ask Gabriel. I observed her from the corner of my eye, wondering if this tactic would work. To my surprise, after a moment she just sighed in resignation. If you won't talk, you'll just. I was only 10 years old. She cut me off coolly and my eyes widened in surprise. My father was a pack doctor and our other pack was attacked by rogues. They killed him and my mother and I ran. We traveled far, and finally came across your pack. I stared in surprise. I didn't remember that. Then again, I would have been nearly the same age as her. My mother had lupus disorder. Now my surprise and shock increased tenfold. Lupus disorder was one of the few diseases that affected werewolves. My father had some fancy technical name for it, but he'd never met a wolf with it. Probably because it was term and a lift and treated. It could also be highly contagious, transmitted to the saliva or bloodstream, or even airborne in some cases. It killed the wolf, side first, leaving the person deranged for months before they died. My affinity was not developed enough for me to treat her. We came to your pack. We begged for treatment from your former alpha and your father. My mother was close to death. They turned us away because of the risk of contagion. I opened and closed my mouth like a fish. They had turned her away. That seemed so cruel and heartless. I knew the disease would have been a risk to the pack. But surely they could have done something. We left and headed towards the Black Mountains pack. My mother died on the way there. They took me, and because I was a 10-year-old getting an affinity, Ava spoke so emotional as lie. I stared down at my hands, feeling ashamed, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. It made sense now why she hated our pack and why she had such an odd look on her face whenever she spoke to my father. I wondered if he remembered her. That had been a decade ago. If Gabriel hadn't told Ava to treat my father, she probably would have left him to rot. I had no idea what to think about all of this. I'm sorry, save it. She rudely cut me off, returning to the boring show. Is that why you're avoiding Will? You want nothing to do with anyone in this pack? I asked it before I could stop myself. Will was one of my best friends. I just had to know. Eva's head snapped to me and I noticed her eyes had gone cold and furious. That's none of your business. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. She knew exactly what I was talking about, confirming my suspicions. She really was Will's mate. He wants his mate, I continued, ignoring her burning stare. He needs his mate. Don't fucking tell me what to do. This is my business. Her lovely face was set in a rigid mask. I was shocked by this outburst of reaction. Surely this could not all have come from something 10 years ago. Something Will had nothing to do with. Either way, I didn't like it when she spoke to me like that. And neither did my wolf. You can't hurt him just because of something that happened 10 years ago that was out of his control. Eva stood up, throwing her hands in the air. That has nothing to do with this. She almost looked menacing, the way her shoulders were hunched. I slowly stood to match her, ignoring my aching body. Then what? Yeah, Skylar. You want to know the reason I don't like you? Aside from everything your pack did to me. Her voice escaped her lips in a hiss. I stared at her blankly. I should have known there was something else. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing Kishut's enthusiasm. It was my fault my father turned her away, as horrible as my pack's actions were. You're insecure. You're weak. And you second-guess yourself. You're not even that pretty. Quite frankly, you don't deserve an alpha for a mate. I gaped at her, unable to speak. My wolf snarled furiously in my mind, and I felt the blood rushing to my cheeks as I growled low in my chest. But even so, I felt her words hit home. It was like she knew exactly what to say to hurt my feelings. You will have my respect when you've earned it, she snapped, gathering up the blankets she had been using. The redhead was still rigid with fury. I had really pissed her off. She headed towards the staircase, turning over her shoulder to fixate me with one last glare. And just so you know, I don't need a mate, because I'm already in love with someone else. I furrowed my brow. That would be a problem for Will, but once she saw her mate, she should be able to get over her previous love. That shouldn't matter, I argued, but Ava waved my words off in annoyance. You're being incredibly selfish, I snapped, standing up for my best friend. Her eyes flashed. As I said before, this is none of your fucking business. Ava adjusted the blanket she was holding again. Suddenly, a calculating expression worked its way onto her face. One last thing, Skylar, she added. I don't suppose the Alpha has told you about our history. I felt as if I had been punched in my chest and all I could do was stare at her as I wondered what the hell she meant. With a scoff at the confusion on my face, Ava made to head upstairs, but just then, I heard the doorknob turn. We both shifted to face the door, almost trance, like in our movements, as it opened to reveal Gabriel standing there. He strode in, looking back and forth between us as if he had no idea what was going on. I glanced at Ava out of the corner of my eye. Her entire expression had changed as her eyes fell on Gabriel. What is this? Gabriel was demanding. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, I said softly, not elaborating. Gabriel's expression tightened. What are you telling her? Eva, he snapped. As Eva's eyes found mine again, I witnessed the true extent of her dislike. She was willing to get in trouble with her alpha to tell me whatever it was she wanted to say. Her perfect features were fixated in a sneer. Her eyes bright and cold. I found myself sweating again, although I wasn't sure if it was from the fever or nervousness. My wolf whimpered softly. I felt the blood rush to my ears as I stared at her. Then at Gabriel. Then back at her again. Surely I was wrong. I couldn't possibly be coming to the right conclusion here. When I looked at Gabriel again, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing Kishut's enthusiasm. His expression said it all. Anger and guilt, intermingled in his dark eyes, as if he knew what she was going to say. He made no attempt to stop her from speaking to me, probably because he knew that lying or trying to cover it up would only make things worse. Eva's smirk widened. Gabriel and I were lovers. Chapter 25. I stood there, completely mute, As the reality of Eva's words sank in and the pain rushed over me like a tidal wave, my hands curled into tight fists, my fingernails cutting into my skin, and in the back of my mind I registered my wolf's painful howls as she realized what the redhead's words entailed. Gabriel had slept with someone else before me. He had given the most intimate part of himself away to another she-wolf. Gritting my teeth to fight against a sudden bout of nausea, my eyes found Gabriel's. The guilt and self-loathing were burning so brightly in his eyes I could nearly feel the sentiment myself. Perhaps I was feeding an echo of his raging emotions. I couldn't help the surge of betrayal that emerged. How could he do something like that? With her of all people. Gabriel moved to take a step forward, but I instantly took one backwards to get away from him. Every inch of me felt repulsed. Dimly, I became aware that Eva's eyes were boring into the side of my head. My eyes flicked to her and my rage only intensified at the look on her face. While she was trying to appear indifferent, I could see the smug smirk hovering at the corners of her red lips. And that's when I realized this was what Eva wanted. She wanted me to feel the pain, to grow enraged, to break down and cry like I was dangerously close to doing. She was attempting to elicit this reaction out of me to prove her superiority. Despite the painful knot of emotions in my chest, I felt a prick of determination. I may be insecure and weak to her, but right now I was going to prove her wrong. The best way to get to Eva now was to not react the way she planned. With a Herculean effort, I straightened my spine and tilted my chin defiantly. I may be a pushover sometimes, but I had a proud streak like every wolf did. There was no denying the nearly overwhelming pain blossoming in my chest, judging by the look on Gabriel's face and the thick tension between us. He could feel it, too. I couldn't take back Eva's words, but I could at least attempt to stay strong and beat her at her own game. My wolf was whimpering in pain, and with every ounce of force I had at hand, I pushed her to the deepest corner of my consciousness. I couldn't have her agony distracting me now. Seizing on this burst of determination, I mentally tried to erect barriers around my consciousness, barring out as much of the pain as I could. I already felt humiliated in front of Gabriel, and broadcasting my feelings, clear as day, would only worsen things. I tried to force the hurt away and maintain a cool face as I spoke. "Well, Gabriel, sleeping with her must have been quite underwhelming for you." To my pleasant surprise, my words came out just as icily as I'd hoped. Gabriel's expression had shifted to one of confusion as he continued to stare at me. I turned my head and focused on Eva. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She is not, and will never be your true mate. Shall never satisfy you the way I can." As I finished speaking, Eva's expression contorted from smugness into one of pure rage. I felt a brief moment of pure satisfaction at the look on her face. Her pale cheeks reddened with anger, and she took a few steps towards me. "Why you ever?" Gabriel cut her off. His voice was nearly a snarl. Eva stopped mid-step, her eyes flicking to him. "Get out of here," Gabriel snapped, coolly and dismissively. Eva hesitated, looking slightly hurt. Again, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction that he was hurting her in some way. I was normally a vindictive person, but I had never wanted to throttle someone so much in my entire life. My wolf was practically begging me to let her out to tear Eva apart. But I couldn't, because that would just prove that she'd gotten to me. But Eva started, but a threatening growl emerged from Gabriel's chest. I said, "Get the fuck out." He snarled at her and Eva flinched, quickly lowering her head and scurrying towards the door. Before she opened it, "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I called after her. I couldn't help myself. "You will never deserve Will as a mate," I said lowly, my voice dripping with venom. A flicker of shock crossed Gabriel's expression, and he turned towards the redhead, who had paused after opening the front door. "You found your mate?" he asked incredulously. There was anger in his voice, and instantly my stomach plummeted. Was Gabriel upset because he didn't want Eva to have a mate because he wanted to have her all to himself? My wolf snarled at the thought. Why, yes, well. She stammered. I had never seen Ava this flustered. I could tell she didn't want to tell Gabriel the truth about Will but didn't want to lie to him. Tu m'as été extraordinaire, my noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You found your mate and you're sitting around here. Now I was completely confused as to why he was angry. I didn't want to, I never wanted Ava trailed off. Blue eyes wide as she took in Gabriel's livid expression. You're fucking telling me that you found your other half? Your what true mate? And instead you are wasting your time trying to sabotage my relationship with mine. I stared at my mate in disbelief. Now, he seemed furious that Ava was going after Will, while I was glad that this was the reason Gabriel was angry. It completely befuddled me. I had never expected him to be pissed off on Will's behalf. I don't want a mate. Ava replied shrilly. She had backed away until she was standing half out. Half in the threshold. You know that. Ivy always told you that. I thought you understood. Maybe I would have understood once. But now, I know what it's like to find my mate. What it's like to be given a chance. You've been given the most precious thing you will ever have. And you are turning it away for some pathetic and selfish reason. Gabriel's tone was devoid of emotion. His countenance dark and intimidating. I was not used to him being so forthright. I could feel a blush rising on my cheeks as I realized that. In some convoluted way, Gabriel was standing up for me. HED called me the most precious thing. It didn't tease the sense of betrayal I felt, but it proved that he was at least capable of some sort of emotion when it came to me. My wolf was turning circles in my head, the hurt still radiating off of her in waves. I tried to push the thoughts of Gabriel and Dave aside. I wanted to rush up into my room, collapse on my bed, and cry. Perhaps that's what I would have done a long time ago. But not now. I was sick of letting Gabriel's every move get to me so easily. Get out. Gabriel was snapping at Ava, and this time there was a calm edge in his tone as he spoke. The redhead backed away, shooting me a furious glare. But Gabriel slammed the door roughly in her face before she could say anything. The sound echoed in the house. It was a wonder that my parents hadn't woken up. I had a suspicion that they were awake, but giving me some space to deal with Gabriel myself. My heart pounded as he slowly turned to face me. The guilt in his expression was palpable, and I turned away so I wouldn't have to look him in the eyes. I still felt as if I was in a state of disbelief. I had never paused to really think about Gabriel's sexual history, but he had gotten distraught of the mere thought of me kissing was so I had just figured. Well, you figured wrong. My wolf snapped furiously. Don't yell at me. This isn't my fault. There must be something wrong with us. If he would pick her instead. She whimpered. He didn't pick her over us. It was in the past it had to be. I fervently prayed that Gabriel hadn't slept with the redhead after he met me. I didn't think I would ever be able to recover from a betrayal like that. I faintly registered that Gabriel was still staring at me. I could feel an echo of his emotions in my chest, and I tried to push it away. Skylar. For once, it appeared he was lost for words. Don't, I snapped, my anger coming out in a rush. It was a long time ago. I didn't even know you existed. His voice was soft, filled with emotion, and I still couldn't look him in the face. You could have told me. I was actually proud of myself for keeping my voice cold, steady, and devoid of emotion. It was all fake, of course. Inside I wanted to break down, but I was not going to let him see me like that. How do I bring that up? How do I go about telling you that I'm a disgusting, selfish pig that slept with another she-wolf before his true mate? I looked down, clenching my jaw. Gabriel's emotions, coupled with mine, were almost too much to bear. I knew I needed to take time to reason this out, to have this conversation with him. But right now I just couldn't. There was a chance I would burst into hysterics at any minute. You know, I don't want to talk about this right now, I muttered lowly, avoiding his gaze. Skylar, just let me explain. I refused to look at him. Please, Skylar, just hear me out. Gabriel rarely said please, and I knew it must have meant a lot for him to almost beg. But my knees were beginning to tremble and my wolf was threatening to come out. The hot fever rushing around underneath my skin did not help the situation, and only served to aggravate me further. I did not need this now. After everything that happened, hadn't I been through enough turmoil? Selfish part of me wanted Gabriel to suffer, if even for a moment, the way I had when Ava said those words. The vindictive part of me rarely made an appearance, but it was emerging now. I really don't want to talk to you right now, I snapped angrily, finally focusing my glare on him. I was scared of his reaction. I just didn't give a damn. I needed to be alone right now. His presence was suffocating. I hurried towards the front door, giving Gabriel a wide berth. He turned towards me but thankfully didn't try to stop me. I might have tried to rip his head off if he did. My wolf was angry beyond belief and I was dangerously close to letting her take over. Not a pretty sight. Skylar, stop. I spun around to snarl at him, my hand on the doorknob. Just stop. I'm going for a run before I shift. Gabriel, don't come after me. Don't try to contact me. He was silent for a few seconds, and I tried to ignore the hurt hovering under the surface of his eyes. He had no right to feel hurt right now. You're just going to leave? He asked finally, voice flat. Yes, and for once, Gabriel, do the thing that won't hurt me. Let me go. I knew those words would cause him pain, but I paid no regard to the guilt that sprung up after I said them. I avoided looking at him and turned to leave. I burst out onto the porch before he could reply. I knew I was being incredibly disrespectful to him as an alpha, but I hoped the side of Gabriel that cared for me, however small, would let me be. For once, I felt a profound sense of relief when he didn't follow. Disregarding the fact that it was ridiculously late at night, I bounded for the nearest fringe of trees. I didn't plan on going too far out of the radius of the Stone of Jacob, but I was going to shift. I had to let my wolf out to run before I made the rash decision to go rip Eva's red hair out and dig my teeth into the side of her neck. I was not normally this violent, but apparently my feelings for Gabriel brought out my animalistic nature. I let my wolf take over, relishing in the feeling of heat rushing through my body and first sprouting from my paws as my bones shifted to accommodate my new form. Once I stood on for paws, I shook out my thick fur, breaking into a jog. The affinity-related fever it had was much less noticeable in this form, although I hoped that running as a wolf wouldn't make things worse for me once I returned to Talix. Speeding up my pace, I threw up thick barriers so nobody would be able to mind, linked to me without considerable effort. Although with Gabriel's alpha strength I knew he could push past my barriers if he really wanted to. I let my wolf's instincts take over as I ran deeper into the forest, trying to escape the pain that had relentlessly been chasing me since I left Gabriel. I ran for a very long time. My paws continued to trample the grassy ground below me as the sun rose above the horizon and steadily crawled into the sky. My pace was much slower than my customary run, as I still felt a bit sore and ever so slightly feverish even in this form. I was now sure this jog would take its toll on my sick body later, but for now I was taking advantage of my wolf's supreme strength and stamina. There was a slight chill in the air even at midday, though the sun was hot on my silver fur. I could tell that autumn was near, although I would not feel the cold until it was far below freezing. Werewolves were built to endure brutal winters. As I dodged through the trees, I realized that my birthday was less than 2 weeks away. I would be 20 years old and I could only hope things would turn around before then. I rarely felt self-pitying, but I couldn't help it. Didn't I deserve just one happy day? Were all of my days going to be as miserable as the most recent ones? I took a lot of time to think as morning transitioned into afternoon, finally pausing in my trek to lie down in the thick grass near a gurgling stream. Panting, I realized I had indeed released some of the pent-up tension I had been feeling. My wolf was slightly calmer now, although she still itched to go rip Eva's head off. Once I was lying there, stretched out and bathing in the bright sunlight, I allowed myself to really go over Eva's words. Lovers, she'd said. The pieces were not difficult to place together, and it was easy to see that she was talking about Gabriel when she had said she was in love with someone. They'd slept together and she had a profound hatred for me. It only made sense that she was in love with my mate. As infuriating as that was, what I hoped was that lovers was an exaggeration. Gabriel had rarely shown me any emotion, and it would cut deeply to think that he'd been in love before. Somehow, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I couldn't picture him being in love with Ava. The self-loathing he had been feeling as she told me the truth was testament that he regretted his actions. Surely that couldn't mean that they were in love. Or so I tried to reassure myself. There was one thing that I could reason through. Gabriel had outright said that all of those things happened before Chidi met me. Despite my churning emotions and sense of betrayal, the logical side of me argued that Gabriel had never thought he would have a mate. His father had brainwashed Gabriel into thinking that his angelic side meant he was forever alone and mateless. I tried to imagine an existence where I thought I would never find that other werewolf meant for me. It seemed like a dreary outlook, but it had been Gabriel's reality. Even worse, he was a full-grown alpha male. Alphas felt emotions much more strongly than the average wolf, and this included hormones. If I had been a fully grown alpha male that thought I didn't have a mate, would I have done any different? I couldn't be sure. All I knew was that I had to make sure none of Gabriel and Eva's interactions happened after he met me. I also couldn't ignore the irritation I felt that Gabriel had made such a big deal out of my kiss with Will. Yet hid something like this from me. He would have to answer to that. I stood up after a while, deciding I had been out here long enough, my mind going in circles for hours. I aimlessly turned around and began to head back towards the village. I definitely did not want to return to my home anytime soon. I couldn't face my parents or Gabriel. I had decided that I would give Gabriel the cold shoulder for the time being until I thought everything through and demanded an explanation from him. He'd always been the one relentlessly pushing me away. Now he was going to get of his own medicine. Upon my return and my transition back to human form, I found my feet carrying me to the one person that might help me feel better, Maria. I couldn't tell her everything about me and Gabriel, but a best friend's advice was sorely needed in this situation. I knocked on her door a couple times, knowing that I probably had twigs in my hair and a flush from my fever, but not caring. My symptoms were actually bearable right now, and her place was safer than mine. I actually couldn't detect any fresh traces of my mate's signature sent near her house. I frowned after there was no answer, and raised my fist to knock again. Loudly, I tried to get a glimpse through the window but couldn't see anyone. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Are you there? I called out tentatively. I could have sworn her scent was fresh. After one more round of knocking, the door finally swung open, and I blinked in surprise as I took in Marius' appearance. It reminded me eerily of the way Will had looked on my doorstep the other day. Marius' dark eyes were bloodshot, her olive-toned skin pale, and her thick hair was in a bedraggled state. Maria, are you okay? My problems momentarily forgotten, Maria shook her head and stepped aside, allowing me entrance. I closed the door behind me and turned to face her. What's wrong? Her red, teamed eyes met mine. I'm sorry I didn't know you were coming over. I was asleep upstairs. No, it's my fault. I didn't warn you. Do you want me to come back later? She shook her head vehemently before attempting to comb through her tangled hair with her fingers. I need to get up and about. It's just Anna's funeral was yesterday, and my tears have been coming and going since then. I stared at her in shock. Wait, yesterday? You mean they had the funeral while I was still out sick? I had completely forgotten that Anna's funeral had been scheduled for the morning after the purge. I felt a surge of guilt, momentarily forgetting my current problems with Gabriel. I had been the last one to see Anna alive, and despite my former dislike for the girl, I had wanted to attend her funeral. They didn't want to wait any longer. Brett was up and around, and didn't want to leave her body just wasting away in their house. I looked down at the ground, swallowing hard. Now I wouldn't get another chance to say goodbye. I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. Don't feel bad, Skylar. Everyone knows you were sick and couldn't make it. Brett probably didn't want me there anyway, I replied bitterly. The expression on Maria's face confirmed my suspicions, and I turned away from her. Making my way into their large living room and settling down on the plush couch in front of the television, Maria settled down next to me, still trying to fix her hair. A few seconds passed in silence as I let the guilt briefly consume me. I couldn't believe I hadn't gone to my own packmate's funeral, especially when it was partially my fault she was dead. You were sick. The pack will understand. My wolf piped up, using a gentle tone. That doesn't make me feel any better about it. I felt my wolf's sympathy, but she didn't reply, and Maria's voice broke into my depressing train of thought. I spoke to her after the funeral, thinking of what only led me to Ava, and I tried not to visibly flinch. How did that go? Maria shrugged slightly, but the glum set of her face said it all before she could. He apologized, and at first it was fine. Then he told me that he thinks HE has found his mate. He keeps scratching her sentences at the redhead. Of her aim with Alpha Gabriel, that she's been avoiding him and he can't find her. I gritted my teeth, the anger from earlier rising again in my chest. I replied shortly with my jaw clenched. Maria didn't seem to notice the sudden coldness in my voice. I was okay with it when he was hung up on you, but now it just hurts all over again. Glancing at Maria's crimpling face, I felt a surge of compassion. She had always worn her emotions on her sleeve, except when it came to Will, so it was strange seeing her open up about him. It must have been painful for Maria to think about him having a mate. She appeared to be dangerously close to crying, and on impulse I drew her into a tight hug. I had come to rant about my problems, but it was clear that she was very vulnerable right now, and I didn't want to impose my own problems on Maria in her fragile state. Taking a deep breath, I pushed my issues aside for the moment and just hugged her to me. I heard her sniffling quietly and spoke to break the silence. Why did you never tell me you liked him? I asked softly. I knew he liked you. I didn't want to make our friendship awkward. I just sighed and didn't reply, keeping Maria in my embrace for several moments until she seemed to calm down. Sorry, she sniffed, moving away from me again and wiping at her eyes. I didn't mean to break down on you, and I know that's not what you came for. She turned to face me, attempting to get a hold of herself. Is everything okay? I looked down at my intertwined fingers, avoiding her piercing gaze. Maria always knew when I was lying, but I didn't want to tell her the truth while she had so much going on. It just wouldn't be fair. You know, it's not a big deal. We can talk about it another time. I don't mind. Tell me. Really, it's not an issue. I just wanted a friendly chat. Maria snorted, and I could sense her eyes rolling. You're an awful liar, and you know it. She reached out a finger and poked me annoyingly. Come on, fess up. I huffed in aggravation. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I'm not going to give you anything else to deal with. I can take it. I need a distraction anyways. Tell me what's going on in your life. I mumbled something incoherent and she prodded me again, causing me to wince. At least she was acting a bit more like her bubbly self. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Despite everything going on around her, heaving a gigantic sigh, I told her almost everything. I started with the revelation about Gabriel and Ava, and exactly how Ava was avoiding Will and how she had got about telling me her history with my mate. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I felt a bit guilty telling someone else about my own mate, sexual past, but I knew Maria wouldn't tell anyone else. After the way Gabriel had treated me, I thought it earned the right to at least talk to one other person about him. This led to incredulity from Maria, and I inevitably explained how Gabriel thought HED never had a mate. I left out his lineage, implying instead that his father's brainwashing was the only reason Gabriel felt that way. Maria and I had both heard of the cruelty of the former Black Mountains pack Alpha David, so it didn't seem too far-fetched. I finished with what it said to Gabriel and the way it stormed out. When I stopped talking, Maria sat there for a long moment, pondering everything she had heard. What are you going to do? This is definitely one of the strangest situations I've encountered, especially since she's whirled off uncertainly. I don't even know what to do. But right now I'm leaning towards the cold shoulder. I've tried so many times to get closer to him. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. But it's damn near impossible. I'm going to make him come to me for once. She nodded, lips pursed in concentration. It definitely sucks that you found out like that. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. But I've heard it isn't that uncommon for werewolves who haven't found their mates by their mid-20s to start sleeping around. It's frowned upon, but it happens. Blame hormones, I guess. I know. But still, I had always dreamed that it'd be the only you know. I can't blame you for that. My best friend was silent for a moment before an oddly sneaky look crossed her features. Hey, Skylar. I frowned at her, preoccupied. I think I know something that will cheer us up. Oh, good grief. Not this again. Once again. Maria was brainstorming some grand idea of fun. Maria fixated me with a mock stern look. Although her eyes were still a bit bleary, looking so it didn't turn out how she intended. My parents are actually meeting with the Alpha right now. I think they are consulting with one of the elders that helped build this village. My eyebrows rose at that, but she continued before I could pry. And later they're going around the territory for something or another. Which means we have the house to ourselves. I didn't like where this was going. Don't tell me. We're gonna throw a party. In one of my very rare sarcastic tones that I seldom used. She grinned a bit cheekily. Not exactly hold on. I blinked in mild surprise as she used some of her enhanced werewolf speed to dash towards the kitchen, returning mere seconds later with a large bottle in her hand. Oh no, I muttered, eyeing the bottle of wine with mild trepidation. I don't really drink. Maria, I know, but there's a lot going on right now. I haven't seen you smile in a long time, Skylar, and I think you just need to have a bit of fun. Getting drunk is fun. She stared at me in exasperation. You really did miss out in high school. We're not getting drunk. Anyways, just a little buzzed. And just not sure it's the best time. You're always so serious. You take on other people's problems and put everyone before yourself. Just lighten up for a few hours. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Almost melancholy expression crossed her features. I was thinking of him before this idea came to me. It's what she would have done in a time like this. Just for a few hours. There's no pack meetings or anything. You won't be missing out. I felt my stomach plummet a bit at the blonde's name. Maria was right and would have taken this opportunity to lighten up. I stared at my friend's hopeful face, thought of everything that had happened today, and sighed in resignation. Werewolves don't even really get affected by alcohol. I mumbled as a last resort. Yes, they do. It just takes us 5 times as much as humans. You'll see. I should have taken the mischievous glint in her eyes as a warning before I agreed. You're never gonna catch my breath. Voice hoarse from so much yelling. Say goodbye to those who knew me. Maria replied in a shrill singing voice. Boy, was I a fool in school for cutting gin. I tried to imitate the man's voice as closely as possible. This guy's got him scared to death. Maria's deep impression was so comical I almost missed the next line. Hope he doesn't see right through me. Now I really wish that I knew how to swim. With the last word, Maria twisted and fell backwards, landing flat on her back on the couch with a loud giggle. For my part, I continued to stand on the coffee table and point at the screen as Mulan was playing, trying my very best to make my voice imitations possible. Dear man, my gravelly impression caused Maria to burst into another round of hysterics. I was most definitely, indisputably, into it being drunk. The 2 large, completely empty bottles of wine next to me, coupled with 2 beers Maria had found in the refrigerator, were testament to that. Maria had much more to drink than had because according to her, I was a complete lightweight. I could understand why people did this now. The lightheadedness coupled with the sense of not having a single care in the world was a relief after I'd been through so much. My still, bikey body and light fever didn't even bother me in this drunken state. Maria and I were on our second Disney movie and we were making sure to sing along to every word. The world was spinning slightly around me, but I ignored it as I pranced around on the table. I felt brave, as if I could take on the world. In fact, I was pretty sure I would punch that stupid redhead in the face if I saw her right now. Oh, Sky, I don't think I've ever seen you laugh so much. Maria cried giddily, pointing at me in an exaggerated manner. Look at you. You're actually acting like a teenager instead of an overprotective mom. I pouted and glared at her. I do not act like a mom. Yes, you do. Worrying all of the time. Being so not spontaneous and thinking things through you make the rest of us look bad. I opened my mouth to reply, but my attention was caught as Shang returned to the screen. It had the biggest crush on him when we were younger, and I didn't care if he was a cartoon. I was still ogling him. A cheers so dreamy. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. Trying to sway my hips to the song, as I was completely uncoordinated when it came to dancing. I failed miserably, but at the moment I didn't care. My wolf was very subdued in the back of my mind. Some part of me knew I was being irresponsible and did pay for this later. But acting carefree and spontaneous was such a nice change that I didn't worry about the consequences for once. The song soon ended, and I somehow ended up sitting back on the couch, staring at the screen with a dazed expression. The world had tilted on its axis, or so I thought. Maria handed me the bottle of wine she was working on, and I sipped on it aimlessly as the movie progressed. The minutes trickled by and my mind inevitably began to return to Gabriel. In this state of mind, my Cain was dulled, but that didn't stop me from thinking about him. Just when we'd had a normal conversation too. I had been so happy that he'd spoken so freely with me. It my alcohol-induced haze. I couldn't lie to myself. I had been overjoyed. I was worried what that meant. The simplest signals from Gabriel drove me crazy. There was no denying the deep feelings I had developed for him. My reaction to Eva's words only confirmed how attached I was getting. The depth of my emotion was frightening me, especially when I considered the consequences of mating with him. I noticed a strong pressure at the back of my mind, which drew me out of my oddly thoughtful state. Frowning slightly in puzzlement, I pushed it away as we continued to comment on the movie and how good Shang looked without his shirt. After a couple minutes the pressure turned to incessant buzzing and I winced, trying vainly to throw up mental walls. I was now aware that it was someone trying to speak to me, but my thoughts had grown so muddled that I couldn't focus enough to have a mental conversation. After another moment, the voice left my mind. Mary's voice dragged me out of my drunken stupor as the song, "A Girl Worth Fighting for," came on. I stood up in a rush, staggering slightly as I clambered back onto the table. Maria stood up next to me and we began a duet. I could barely remember the words at this point, save for the chorus, but I didn't have a care in the world. I tried to pretend I was Mulan bravely charging into battle. Midway through the song, I heard the front door open. My brain and wolf registered the noise, but I continued to stare at the bright TV screen as I sang. Beside me, Maria paused in her karaoke and turned to face the visitors, so I was left to sing a solo. What do we want? A girl worth fighting for, To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. Raising my hands in the air, I quickly became aware that Maria had my arm in a vice that gripped and was tugging on it. Frowning in puzzlement, I turned to follow her line of sight. I gulped and stared at the culprits that dare intrude on our karaoke. Standing near the front door, looking completely perplexed, were Maria's parents. Standing behind them, tall, imposing and beautifully handsome as usual, was the last person in the world I wanted to see, Gabriel, and he didn't look happy.